This program is brought to you by Link TV for educational and non-commercial use only. Link TV is the only U.S. television network devoted to global and national news, with uncompromising documentaries and diverse cultural programs, programs which connect you to the world.
The following program is an original production of Link TV.
Hi, I'm Angie COIRO, the host of Mother Jones Radio, and welcome to this special edition of Link TV's Earth Focus in partnership with Mother Jones. My guest is Julia Whitty, and she has written the cover article for the special Mother Jones issue on the ocean. Her article is The Fate of the Ocean. Julia, welcome.
Thank you, Angie.
All those many years, 72 films, 25 years of being a film documentarian, you've developed a real theory about the connectedness of what happens in the sea, what happens to us.
Yeah, we don't all live on the coast, but our life is influenced and affected strongly by the ocean. We live on an ocean planet. Our planet should be called ocean, not Earth. It's 77% ocean water. And we are affected by its health. And part of what we've done in this issue is take a look at the overall health of our ocean planet. You
have a passage where you say that we carry the ocean within us. It's in our blood. It's in our eyes. Explain that and tell us what that has to do with how we're going to approach the problems with the ocean.
Well, we all come from the ocean, as we know. We believe life began in the ocean, and we still are basically, we still carry ocean water within us. And as I say in the article, we even see through seawater what's in our eyes. And yet we appear blind to the fate of what's going on in the ocean. And one of the reasons we tackled a comprehensive look at the oceans in this issue is because people tend to have heard a little bit here and a little bit there, and I felt like I wanted to put it all together and bring people up to date with the assaults that are happening from all directions on the world ocean today.
Well, it's a really natural human thing to do. If it's not happening in front of your face, either it's really not happening or it doesn't matter that much to you on a day-to-day basis. And you make the comparison throughout that if you're clear-cutting a forest, if you're bulldozing a field, we all see that, we all understand that, and the equivalent is happening in the oceans, it's just not right in front of us.
That's right. It's happening all over the place, and it does impact us. Even if we live far inland, the fate of the ocean will affect our life on Earth, and that's part of what we're talking about in this issue, is how we are not separate from the ocean. It is the biggest single force on our planet. It is 77% of the coverage of our planet, and we can't exist without a healthy ocean. And right now, it's not a healthy ocean.
When you talk about the connectedness, you're talking in one sense about the physical connectedness of all the waters in the world, that there's a conveyor belt of sort, a Mobius strip where the water moves throughout, and what's in one ocean this year is somewhere down the line going to end up on the other side of the world.
That's right. We were taught in geography class that there are disparate oceans on our planet, but in fact they're all connected. They flow into and out of one another on a course of, say, 1,200 years one way. And a drop of rain that falls in the North Atlantic will eventually circle Antarctica and emerge in the North Pacific. This connects all the oceans of the world, and it affects climate. And we know that in times past in Earth history, the ocean conveyor belt has shut down, and there have been radical climate changes across the planet, including some of the glaciations and things like that have taken place during times when the ocean conveyor belt was not flowing.
What would cause that?
There are changes in ocean chemistry, and ocean chemistry is affected by temperature and salinity primarily. So if you change either or both of those, you're likely to affect the flow of the ocean conveyor belt. As we know right now, we are affecting temperature. We do have global warming underway, and it has warmed the ocean significantly in the last 40 years. As the ocean warms, it's melting icy areas, the Arctic and the Antarctic, and these are adding a lot more fresh water into the oceans, and that's changing the salinity of the oceans. And as we change one parameter of temperature, we are also changing the chemistry of the ocean, and that in itself is a very dangerous development.
Well, especially when an animal has evolved to live in a specific place and time, a special acidity, a special salinity, and then you change that on that animal. We're doing it unnaturally. They don't have time to adapt.
That's true. And some of the studies right now are showing that as global warming increases and greenhouse gases increase, we're changing the acidity of the ocean. This acidity affects the ability of, for instance, seashells to make their shells. And for all the planktonic animals, which are most of the big fish in the sea when they're in their tiny little larval stages, It affects those animals' ability to make their bony structures. And some studies have shown that by the year 2100, the acidity of the oceans will prevent those animals from making shells and bones.
We're talking in the cases of some animals a terrible decimation, and in some cases we're talking overall extinction.
Yes, we are. And we've seen big extinction events in Earth's history in the past, and many scientists today will admit and agree that we're coming up upon one of those. We have all the parameters. They're happening very, very quickly. And the ground zero for this extinction event may very well be in the world ocean.
So the conveyor belt actually has historically stopped, or at least been blocked up before. What are the implications of a long-term blockage, or what it seems we're on the way to?
Well, for instance, the worst extinction in Earth's history was the Permian-Triassic boundary, not when the dinosaurs died off, but way before that, 251 million years ago. And among other things, we know that the ocean conveyor belt system stopped running. We know that most of the ocean became a dead zone. This led to nearly the extinction of all life on Earth. 95% of marine species were killed, 70% of land species were killed, and essentially mushrooms ruled the globe for many an eon. And that's basically something we could be looking at with the similar kinds of assaults that we're loading onto the planet right now.
It's fascinating to hear. It rings of the arguments that you hear that global warming is not a human construct, that this kind of thing has happened in the past before, so we're just riding the inevitable wave of moving to another such event.
You know, there could be another event, but it might, in all honesty, be, 600 million years in the future when we probably aren't going to be what we are now anyway. We'll be off in some other solar system, most likely. But the truth is, what's happening now is being caused by us. It's also happening at what we believe is an unprecedented rate in the history of natural change on the planet. So things are happening faster. Yes, we have historical models we can look at and we can say, yeah, this resembles something that happened many hundreds of millions of years ago, but now it's happening faster and we're causing it. Do we really want to do that?
One of the most hopeful things that occurred in terms of political history was the Kyoto Accord, despite the fact that the U.S. opted out of really participating thoroughly in that. It does show that people are working on this, and I want to emphasize that you don't draw a completely hopeless picture.
No, never before, for instance, has science focused so intensively on one direction, and that is the changes that are going on our planet today as a result of human activities. We now know more about the life support system of our planet than we've ever known. We know what's wrong, and we know what to do, and what we still have to prove is that we have the political will to do it.
You had another point about that really made me curious, and you said that for the most part, scientists talk about global warming and the other elements we'll be discussing amongst themselves, and they don't go out of their way to educate the press and therefore the public. Tell us a bit about that.
Well, I think it's one of the biggest problems we have right now is the press and science don't talk to each other. Science is leery of the press because they think they oversimplify everything, and the press is leery of science because, frankly, most of them can't understand it. And the public, therefore, is left underinformed and undereducated. And this is a very dangerous combination, really, for the future of our planet.
Well, in the time we have, then, let's do what we can to educate people about, for example, one of the key things you bring up, which is overfishing. We rely on the seas to feed us as a people, and the sea creatures, in turn, rely on other sea creatures in a healthy environment to make sure that they stay around with us. What we're seeing right now is fishing that, as you say, has become so efficient it is inefficient. What does that mean?
That means industrialized fisheries, which is what it is today, are stripping the oceans bare. And sadly, for all the target fish we might be going after, tuna or swordfish, we're collecting literally millions of tons per year of fish that we don't want, don't eat, and yet we kill in these industrialized fisheries. These are enormous nets, up to 160 miles long. These are fishing lines baited with up to 11,000 hooks. These are terribly indiscriminate technologies that we're using, and we would never do this in this day and age on the land, but we go ahead and do it in the ocean because no one can really see.
Yeah, you used a really powerful analogy of destroying an entire forest to flush out a few quail. Mm-hmm. And that gets us into, let's go to the specifics of some of these. You were talking about the nets. And the nets, as you were explaining, they're not biodegradable. They don't always stay attached to the ship. Talk about the life of a drift net after it's cast from the ship and what may happen to it then.
Well, sadly, many of the drift nets are lost at sea or abandoned at sea in bad weather, and they are set frequently very deep, maybe 1,000 feet deep. And they're just drifting down there for years, perhaps decades, and they continue to catch fish. And The fish that get caught in it die and decay and attract more predators who come in and get caught. And these things can fish with, as I said, nightmarish efficiency for years.
And even the ones that are brought up as they're intended to be full of a catch, obviously there's no way to designate what gets caught and what doesn't.
Absolutely. I mean, it's a very indiscriminate form of fishing. And along with your target species, whatever that may be, you know, these fisheries catch hundreds of thousands of turtles and seabirds and millions of sharks per year. And these animals are usually dead because many of them are air-breathing, or like sharks, they need to move to breathe. And when they come to a stop, they die in these nets.
It's easy to understand, especially after we've talked about what fish are caught in nets that don't belong there in the first place, that some fish are caught, some are kept, some get thrown back. But it's really hard to fathom. There's a good illustration that accompanies the article, but can you encapsulate for people how huge that percentage is, what a great amount of fish are killed because they're the wrong fish who happen to show up on the wrong line?
Well, it's estimated that as much as 25% of the total world fish catch is what's called bycatch, which is fish that is inadvertently caught and is killed and just thrown overboard, either dead or dying. That adds up to somewhere in the neighborhood of 88 billion pounds of life a year. Now, if we were to do anything on that scale on Earth, you can bet there'd be a huge outcry. Let's say you were going to hunt lions. You were going to be selling lion meat in the grocery store, and in order to catch lions, you were killing antelope and wildebeest and elephants and every other thing that lived on the African savanna to get at it. There'd be a huge outcry about this, but we do this routinely in the oceans.
It would seem it would be in the interest of the people who work on fisheries management to preserve these large groups, not only of one particular kind of fish, whatever they're fishing for, but the ecosystem in which they thrive. So what is it with the fisheries management that is so tunnel visioned about this?
There's a little bit of a revolution underway in fisheries management right now, and until now, fisheries managers have used what's called a single species approach, where they've just attempted to manage one species. And we talked about things being interconnected. The oceans are too interconnected. You can't just manage one species. You really need to look at the bigger picture. And so what some people are now advocating is that we do ecosystem-based management rather than single species management. It's hard to get these managers, who are usually government employees, to go along with this. It's a shift in thinking. Maybe the younger generation will start to make it, but right now it's not really happening.
What would ecosystem management, where fisheries are concerned, look like? What would that entail logistically?
In many cases, it entails at least some period of time of creating a marine reserves. It's certain core areas where maybe no fishing is allowed for a certain period of years, knowing that as you protect a core, it all will fan outward with healthier fish on the perimeters. And after time, you may even be allowed to allow fishing back in, although you may always protect a key core area. So it will start to look more like that. Another key shift that's underway in the thinking right now is towards what fish do we catch. And in the past, fisheries managers have thought that in helping to save fish populations, we would just catch the big old fish. And in fact, fisheries scientists are now seeing that what they call the big old fat female fish, or the BOFs, are the most valuable members of a fish society. They make more eggs and they make better quality eggs than younger females. And these are the last fish we should be targeting to catch. We should be allowing the big old fat female fish to live out their lives happily and never catch them. In fact, we should be targeting younger females who have already reached sexual maturity, at least some of them.
We should take a moment just to appreciate the term BOFs. Now we can move on. So the Nature Conservancy is actually doing some of what you were talking about. The Nature Conservancy is buying up areas and teaching people how to manage ecosystems in an area. What kind of success are they having?
Well, the Nature Conservancy is doing some innovative things in terms of protection of our ocean environment. And some of the things they are doing, they have buyback programs. They're actually buying up fishing leases and not using them, and they're buying up fishing boats and keeping them in port. In many cases, in most of the world, commercial fisheries are subsidized, as is agriculture, and we often send boats out when they're not even profitable, and it's really questionable whether they should be sent out. So the Nature Conservancy and some other groups are looking into actually buying up leases and boats, allowing fishermen to get out of the business entirely in marginal fisheries and retiring those leases. The same thing with submerged lands leasing, which is parts of the underwater ocean floor that are leased to oil drilling companies and others who want to drill for oil. Some of these environmental organizations now are buying the leases themselves and just leaving them be, letting them sit. And so these are innovative and exciting new ways that we can overcome the incredibly slow regulatory process that we're faced with. We can't seem to get Washington to make changes. There are some other more creative ways we can go and work even without their cooperation.
So in terms of a consumer trying to make choices that are responsible, and of course nowadays we hear that we're supposed to be eating more fish. It's supposed to be so much better for us at least 2 or 3 times a week. So we go to the grocery store, and how do we make our choices?
You want to really consider, are you buying a fish that's been sustainably and responsibly fished, or are you contributing to the destruction of entire species? You should know these things before you buy your fish in the supermarket. And there are a lot of websites now that will tell you what fish are good to buy and what fish are not good to buy. And you should know that all wild fish bear heavy contaminant loads. Some of them are not yet heavy enough for them to end up on the EPA's list saying don't eat them. But I think all consumers should be aware that that 2 to 3 meals of fish a day was based on the thought that fish was completely clean, and it's really not clean anymore.
What about the farmed fish? Any cleaner?
No, farmed fish are much dirtier in general than wild fish, and you'd be much better off eating a wild Alaskan salmon, if you could find one, than a farmed salmon. And you have that right. You can go to your grocery store, you can go to the fish counter and ask them to stock wild Alaskan salmon if they don't have it. Those are healthy stocks of fish, and they are relatively clean. They're relatively uncontaminated.
And in fact, in terms of monitoring what this does to the population, there are folks in the Arctic, I believe, who are already showing amounts of mercury in their system that could affect how they behave and how they function.
Absolutely. Inuit populations across the Arctic are facing terrible burdens, toxic burdens of both mercuries, DDTs, PCBs, those kind of things, the same things that are affecting their primary foodstuffs, which are polar bears and seals. These are some of the most polluted environments on Earth. Things are really bioaccumulating up there in the cold regions, and some of the Eskimo populations are really beginning to suffer.
Let's move to one of the topics that you talk about where there is actually an evident solution to be had, and these are the dead zones, and they exist primarily where rivers come out into larger waters at the mouth of the river, and a lot of this can be blamed on pesticides and fertilizers used in farmlands. Can you explain how that works and how it affects the oxygen balance?
Predominantly, it's an issue of fertilizers, and this is an outgrowth of the green revolution. And ever since we made the land so green, we've ironically been killing off the oceans. The same fertilizers that make plants grow on land also make them grow in the sea, and too many plants in the sea is a very bad thing. And what happens is, as these plants grow and die, they feed decomposers who then use up all the oxygen in the water. And there are literally places, usually at the mouths of big river systems, where the water does not contain enough oxygen to support marine life. They become more or less completely empty of life.
And the solution that's been proposed for this, it's actually just a matter of industry carrying on, or grabbing onto it. The solution that's been proposed involves cutting back the feeding of the crops by about 14%, 12 to 14%, and that would not affect, as the numbers in your article show, that would not affect the yield, so that we could effectively see less pollution and less of the die-off zones and the same amount of food. So why is that not just happening?
Well, you're specifically discussing the Mississippi River Basin, right, and the breadbasket of the United States. And yes, the studies show that about 14% reduction in fertilizer use would significantly decrease the dead zone at the mouth of the Mississippi River. However, you've got something on the order of 30 states that are part of the breadbasket, and they all need to create laws to control fertilizer use. You can imagine how hard it is to get one state to go along with these kinds of laws, get 30 states, some of whom are hundreds of miles from the ocean, to agree to change their practices for something they never even see, and you can see how difficult this might be.
And that goes back to the interconnectedness. If people in Kansas don't understand that what happens to the ocean has a direct effect on them, we're not going to get anywhere with this.
That's right.
Well, you pointed out that was specifically to do with Mississippi. What are some of the other key dead zones around the world?
Europe has some very bad dead zones. The Baltic Sea is one of the worst out there. It's a persistent dead zone. It's year-round, and it's about the size of South Carolina now. And not all of these are caused by agricultural runoff from the land. Some of them, for instance, the Chesapeake Bay and Long Island Sound here in the United States, are caused by airborne emissions from coal burning plants and things like that.
And we know what the efforts to regulate them have been like.
Right. We've lost ground actually on that in recent years.
Let's talk about the Arctic, where we see not only the effects of pollution, but we also, of course, see the effects of global warming. What are some of the most distinct changes we've seen? And tell us, they've actually happened over just the last few handfuls of years. Mm-hmm.
We are seeing definite melting of the Arctic. The summertime ice is, with each, the last 4 years have been the smallest amounts of summertime ice in the Arctic, with each year trumping the previous year. 2005 overall was the warmest year on record that we know of on the planet. And now we're beginning to see that even the wintertime ice accumulation in the Arctic is not growing as big as it used to. And all of this has many effects. It's going to raise sea levels worldwide. It's already happening. Some people are raising questions of what's the point of fixing New Orleans when we're just going to be raising sea levels up anyway, and they're going to be so subject to flooding, as will many of our great cities. So we have sea level rise. We also have changes in salinity now. We are freshening the ocean. It's less salt as we put all this dissolved fresh water into it. That again changes the chemistry of the ocean. The chemistry of the ocean changes currents. We're back to the ocean conveyor belt. And now we have a change in the whole weather pattern of the planet as we change the ocean conveyor belt.
And it's hard to believe there are folks who find a silver lining in that can be mined. But in fact, you mentioned that in the Arctic, for example, people see that the melting is going to take place, and they're racing to get rights to land, to drilling, to gold, to oil. They're racing to get the rights for the land underneath the ocean, which 20 years ago they wouldn't have thought about because it was utterly useless. That's a heck of an interest block to have to fight to get anything preserved there.
Absolutely. I mean, right now the U.S. and Canada, normally we're quite good friendly neighbors, are having a major dispute over the rights to Arctic boundary waters and who really owns these pieces of land. Because the Northwest Passage is scheduled to open, the fabled Northwest Passage, which no one could ever find, will be opening up, most people believe, within the next 20 to 30 years. And whoever has the shipping rights to that is going to make a lot of money. So there's a huge land grab going on right now in the Arctic. Sadly, it doesn't bode well for things like polar bears who depend on sea ice. And we're looking at the potential extinction of polar bears and some of their prey like harp seals, which den on sea ice.
I understand, for example, that the polar bears, like any other mammal, they have their limits. They have an ability to swim so far from ice floe to ice floe, and if the ice floes are fewer and further between, there are cases now where they think polar bears are drowning.
Absolutely. There's been evidence in the last few summers of seeing polar bears drowned and also of seeing polar bears cannibalizing one another and eating one another.
We're also seeing that they have an increased amount of pollution in their bodies, and we're back to the mercury with that.
Polar bears are now considered one of the one or two most polluted animals on Earth, along with killer whales up in the Norwegian fjords. And these animals, in many cases after death, they are so loaded with toxins that they are classified as toxic waste.
Does anyone immediately come to mind who's focused on working in that area?
There are a lot of environmental organizations that are trying to raise the alarm bells about this, but eventually it comes down to governments. And as we can see, we have a very scattershot approach right now. There are some nations and countries that are willing to examine these issues, and then we have the United States. Our government currently says that these aren't even real issues. They're using the little bit of normal variation that exists within science to say, well, let's just not look at any of this, when in fact overwhelmingly the scientists of the world have agreed that global climate change is an enormous problem that we need to tackle, and yet the United States, the biggest greenhouse gas polluter, has yet to get on board these efforts.
If there's a fun part to your article, it's how you gathered all of this. And you didn't sit behind your typewriter. Did I say typewriter? How old? You didn't sit behind your computer and just gather up other people's science studies. You actually went out on, they call it a boat or a ship, I'm not nautical, a 177-foot craft with a Woods Hole Institute doing a survey. Tell us about that.
Well, I actually went out with a couple of people, but the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute out of Cape Cod, and we went out aboard Oceanus, one of their signature ships that they do research aboard, and we were looking at the ocean conveyor belt, some of the critical parts of the ocean conveyor belt and what's happening. Is it changing? We worked in very tough conditions, very challenging conditions out there, but it was very exciting to see how the science is actually conducted in the field and how challenging that is and how hard it is to work on the ocean. And while we were out there, scientists in the UK who'd been studying the same issue were putting together their findings and realizing that they were finding the first signs of significant changes in the flow of the ocean conveyor belt, which is bad news for all of us.
One of these forays out, as you explained, is something that they do annually. But you've been talking throughout your article about how some of the changes we're seeing in the ocean have really accelerated over the last 5 or 10 years. Have they accelerated so fast, or chemistry composition changed so fast, that you could see a difference from one year to the next?
There are places that I've certainly seen it in my filming career where I've been able to see changes in the communities that I've been filming from one year to the next. Coral reef communities that will be healthy one year and more or less completely rearranged the following year due to a host of problems, from hurricanes, which, to coral bleaching events, warmer water temperatures, overfishing issues, and all kinds of things like that. So yeah, there are changes now are happening rapidly in the oceans.
You're actually writing a book right now about coral reefs, so you understand probably better than most of us why it matters if we lose a coral reef. Aside from the beauty of it, yes, we'll have one less thing that's beautiful to look at, but how else does it matter in the ecosystem?
Well, coral reefs are one of the nurseries of the sea, and so an awful lot of creatures are sort of brought to adulthood in the realm of the coral reef. In many cases, animals that actually might spend their adulthood farther afield, spend their childhood somewhere in the vicinity of a coral ecosystem. Obviously, a huge proportion of humanity lives along the tropical coastlines of coral reefs, and 1 in 6 people, fish is their primary source of protein on planet Earth, and that comes largely from coral reefs and their attendant ecosystems. So humans depend upon coral reefs, and there have been eras in the past on Earth where there were no coral reefs, but never when human beings were on the Earth. And so we don't know what would happen. If we could survive without coral reefs, we don't know that answer.
Well, you'd have to presume they evolved for a reason, so filling a need, so to speak. You have an interesting sentence toward the close of your article, and I think it really reflects the mixture of emotions that goes into continuing this kind of study. You say, we're happy at least, you're referring to being back on the ship, we're happy at least in this moment to be at sea in bad conditions, collecting good data that may well lead to bad news. And I need to ask you that, having been in this, for lack of a better word, industry of going to the ocean and explaining to the rest of us what's happening, there is a lot of negativity. There is a lot of bad news. And the very work that you've done now, the people working side by side with you, are, as you say, potentially producing more bad news. So where's the optimism? What keeps you going on this?
Well, I think our only hope is if we do continue to learn what we need to know and to hopefully make the changes. If we don't do that, we really are going to be in trouble. And obviously, there's a lot of people that will never know these things if some voices don't continue to say them the way they know how. I've worked in television, and I've tried to bring forth some of these messages, and hopefully they get through over time.
Julia, I want to thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you, Angie.
Julia Whitty continues her work as a documentarian. As an author, she has a new book on coral reefs coming out shortly, and she has written the cover article for Mother Jones Magazine's special Oceans issue. Following this presentation, you'll see a list of relevant websites for you to get information and take some direct action if you like. This show has been a combined effort of Mother Jones and Link TV. This is Earth Focus. I'm Angie COIRO. Thank you for joining us.
This program is brought to you by Link TV for educational and non-commercial use only. For a transcript of this program, to watch streaming video, or for instructions on how to receive Link TV in the United States, visit linktv.org.